I got demoted from my boss's mistress, then she made one mistake that ruined them both. I didn't see the betrayal coming. I was too busy saving their $19 million contract. They say hard work pays off, and I believed that for 7 years at Clayton Ridge Innovations, where I'd climbed from junior analyst to senior operations manager through pure competence and 70-hour weeks. My name is Lauren Fields, and I'm 34 years old. If you're into real, jaw-dropping workplace betrayals and sweet revenge stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button below and check out the other wild tales waiting for you on this channel. Now let's begin. I just rescued our company's most critical federal contract, an energy device launch that nearly collapsed before I rebuilt the entire logistics framework. Our Raleigh headquarters buzzed with success stories, but mine was the kind that happened behind closed doors. While executives took credit at board meetings, I was the one who'd salvaged vendor relationships, rebuilt partner trust, and delivered results that kept Clayton Ridge profitable. Lauren, you're a miracle worker, Marcus Bell, my senior analyst, said after our latest milestone meeting. That federal logistics initiative was dead in the water before you touched it. I smiled, watching through my office window as North Carolina's Research Triangle hummed with spring activity. The perfect ecosystem where universities, government agencies, and tech companies created exactly the kind of federal contracting opportunities I'd built my career around. After years of grinding through Raleigh's competitive corporate landscape, I finally felt secure in my position. My team respected me, clients trusted me, and my track record spoke louder than office politics. But as I'd soon learn, competence can make you dangerous to people who lack it. And some battles aren't won in conference rooms. They're fought in shadows where merit doesn't matter. February brought whispers of change that should have alarmed me. CEO Graham Colton had been under intense board pressure after 2 consecutive quarters of disappointing returns, and desperate leaders make unpredictable decisions. But the tension had been building longer than that. During December's board presentation, Graham had struggled to answer technical questions about our federal contracts, questions I'd prepped him for weeks in advance. When board members asked for the architect of our compliance success to join future meetings, Graham's smile never reached his eyes. The board wants more public-facing innovation, he announced during our monthly leadership meeting. Fresh perspectives, new energy, strategic realignment. Corporate speak for someone's getting thrown under the bus, and I was beginning to suspect I knew who. What worried me more was Graham's demeanor, the nervous energy of a man whose job security depended on dramatic gestures. At 49, he'd built Clayton Ridge through political maneuvering rather than operational excellence, and now the chickens were coming home to roost. We're bringing in external strategic consultants, he continued, avoiding eye contact with anyone who'd been carrying the company's actual workload. Innovation specialists with investor backing. Marcus leaned over and whispered, translation, expensive consultants who'll recommend firing the people who actually know how things work. I nodded, but something colder was settling in my stomach. In my experience, when CEOs started talking about fresh perspectives, they usually meant replacing competent women with connected men. Or in this case, as I'd soon discover, replacing competent women with something far more personal and dangerous. The question was, who was about to become expendable? Jessa Langford arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, like a perfectly staged corporate photo shoot. 28 years old, blonde, confident, and completely out of place in our technical operations environment. Graham introduced her as our new strategic innovation consultant during the weekly all-hands meeting. Jessa comes highly recommended by some of our key investors, Graham said, his voice carrying an unusual warmth that made my skin crawl. She's here to provide strategic oversight on our major initiatives. I studied her credentials on the company directory. MBA from a respectable but not elite program, 3 years of consulting experience at firms I'd never heard of, and a LinkedIn profile heavy on buzzwords but light on actual accomplishments. During the Q&A, Jessa spoke in polished generalities about synergistic innovation frameworks and stakeholder optimization, carefully avoiding any technical specifics about our federal contracts or operational challenges. "What's your background with Department of Commerce compliance protocols?" I asked, testing her knowledge of our core business. "I prefer to take a holistic approach to regulatory frameworks," she deflected smoothly. "Sometimes fresh eyes see solutions that institutional knowledge might miss." Marcus caught my eye and mouthed bullshit from across the room. After the meeting, I watched Jessa follow Graham toward his corner office, their body language telling a story that had nothing to do with strategic consulting. Over the next 3 weeks, Jessa's integration into Clayton Ridge followed a pattern I'd seen before. New consultants gradually expanding their influence through strategic positioning rather than actual contribution. Week 1. She observed meetings, asked thoughtful-sounding questions, and built rapport with executive assistants who controlled calendar access. Week 2. Her strategic recommendations began appearing in Graham's presentations, usually repackaged versions of insights my team had developed months earlier. Week 3. She started requesting access to project files for strategic alignment purposes, always with Graham's authorization, and always after hours. "She's mapping our entire operation," Marcus observed during one of our private debriefs. "Yesterday she asked me about vendor relationships, contract timelines, and team management structures. That's not strategic consulting, that's job shadowing." The whispers had started in other departments too. "Did you hear about the anonymous HR complaint someone filed about the new consultant?" Jennifer from compliance mentioned quietly. "Apparently it just disappeared without investigation." Even the federal liaisons had noticed. During our monthly check-in, one pulled me aside. "Lauren, who exactly is this Jessa person? She's asking about classified vendor protocols, but she's not on our approved contact list." But every question, every concern, every complaint seemed to vanish into Graham's protective bubble around her. By the end of March, the pattern was undeniable. Jessa wasn't just observing our operations, she was systematically learning to replace me. Every question she asked my team, every file she requested access to, every late-night session with Graham was building towards something specific. The breakthrough came during a vendor conference call when she attempted to explain our compliance methodology to a Department of Commerce liaison. Her explanation was word for word from a presentation I'd given the previous month, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never actually designed the systems she was describing. "Jessa's explanation sounds familiar," Marcus whispered afterward. "Because it was your explanation, from the February board meeting." That's when I understood the timeline. Graham hadn't brought in Jessa to supplement my work. He'd brought her in to study my work, learn my relationships, and eventually claim my position. The affair was personal, but the professional replacement had been planned from the beginning. "She's not learning to assist me," I told Marcus quietly. "She's learning to become me." The demotion was already decided. They were just waiting for the right moment to execute it. And probably for Jessa to feel confident enough to take over publicly. I had perhaps weeks before they made their move, but I was finally seeing the trap they'd been building around me for months. 2 weeks later, the meeting request came on a Monday morning. Strategic realignment discussion, confidential, with Graham, HR Director Patricia Mills, and Jessa in attendance. No agenda, no context, just a calendar invitation that felt like a corporate death sentence. I'd seen this playbook before, the closed-door meeting, the HR presence for documentation purposes, the vague title designed to avoid creating paper trails. Someone was getting terminated or demoted, and I knew exactly who. Walking into Graham's corner office, I noticed Jessa's perfectly arranged notepad and her satisfied expression. She'd positioned herself strategically next to Graham, creating a visual alliance that excluded me from the power structure. "Lauren, thank you for your incredible work on the federal initiative," Graham began, using the past tense that confirmed my worst fears. "We're implementing some strategic changes to better align with board expectations." Patricia opened a folder with my name on it. Never a good sign. "We're realigning oversight responsibilities," Graham continued. "You'll remain in operations, but Jessa will now lead the final strategic phases of the federal rollout." The words hit like a physical blow. 7 years of excellence reduced to an operations role so his mistress could take credit for my work. But this was just the beginning of their mistake. This isn't personal, Lauren, Patricia said, her voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered this speech before. We're streamlining executive visibility to better serve stakeholder expectations. Personal. Nothing about this was more personal. My performance reviews have been exemplary, I said carefully, knowing that anything emotional would be used against me later. The federal initiative is ahead of schedule because of systems I designed and relationships I built. And your operational excellence will continue to be valued, Graham replied smoothly. But strategic leadership requires different skill sets. Fresh perspectives. Jessa brings investor confidence and stakeholder alignment that the board specifically requested. Jessa nodded earnestly, playing her role perfectly. I'm looking forward to building on the strong foundation you've created, Lauren. Your institutional knowledge will be invaluable as we move forward. The audacity was breathtaking. She was positioning herself as my superior while acknowledging that I'd done all the actual work. What specifically will change about my role? I asked. Patricia consulted her notes. Your system access will be adjusted to reflect operational responsibilities. Project leadership transitions to strategic oversight. Reporting structure realigns with executive hierarchy. Corporate speak for, you're being stripped of authority so someone else can take credit for your success. But taking credit would prove easier than actually doing the work they'd stolen. April became a masterclass in corporate theater. Jessa attended meetings where she contributed nothing but buzzwords, signed off on decisions she didn't understand, and gradually took credit for milestones that predated her arrival by months. Graham supported her performance with the enthusiasm of a man protecting more than just strategic innovation. His body language around her was different. Protective, intimate, possessive. Office rumors had been circulating for weeks, but now the evidence was becoming undeniable. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, Marcus observed during our coffee break. Yesterday I saw them leave the parking garage together at lunch. Today she's wearing a necklace that looks suspiciously expensive for a consultant's salary. I'd noticed that too. Jessa's wardrobe had upgraded significantly since joining Clayton Ridge, featuring designer pieces that didn't align with her supposed compensation level. But personal indiscretions were less important than professional incompetence. Jessa was making small errors that would compound into major problems. Missed deadlines explained away as strategic delays, compliance shortcuts justified as efficiency optimization, and vendor relationships damaged by her inability to understand technical requirements. The federal contract had built-in safeguards that I designed specifically to prevent the kind of mistakes that ambitious amateurs typically make. Soon, those safeguards would be tested in ways that Graham and Jessa couldn't imagine. And when they failed, the consequences would be public, documented, and career-ending. 3 weeks into my demotion, May 15th, by my careful count, Jessa made the mistake I'd been expecting. Living in my stripped-down office on the 3rd floor, I'd been quietly monitoring the federal contract through vendor coordination reports that I still had operational access to review. 6 weeks after Jessa's arrival, oversight responsibilities that required actual expertise finally overwhelmed her. She missed a crucial Department of Commerce export clearance deadline. Instead of admitting the error and requesting an extension, standard procedure that would create a paper trail, she chose deception. I discovered it by accident while reviewing vendor coordination reports. The export clearance form showed a submission timestamp that I knew was impossible because I'd been tracking the deadline myself and knew she'd missed it by 3 days. "Marcus, look at this," I said, showing him the discrepancy on my screen. This form was supposedly submitted on Tuesday, but I was in the vendor meeting on Wednesday where she was still asking about submission requirements. Marcus leaned over my shoulder, studying the data. The timestamp shows Tuesday at 2:17 p.m., but look at the metadata. The file was actually created Friday at 11:43 p.m. My blood went cold. Backdating federal compliance documents wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. A career-ending mistake that could trigger criminal investigations and destroy Clayton Ridge's federal contracting eligibility. "She probably doesn't realize that our system includes automatic audit trails," I said, pulling up the technical logs. "Every edit, every access, Every modification is tracked by independent servers. Marcus whistled low. Should we report this? I stared at the evidence, thinking about months of humiliation and professional sabotage. Not yet. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Because if Jessa was willing to forge federal documents, what other shortcuts was she taking with my life's work? Over the next week, I quietly audited every document Jessa had touched since taking over my project. What I found was a pattern of shortcuts, cover-ups, and regulatory violations that would make federal investigators salivate. 3 backdated compliance forms, 2 vendor payments processed without proper authorization signatures, 1 safety certification submitted with falsified testing data, and most damning of all, evidence that she'd used Graham's executive credentials to override system access controls, a federal security violation that could trigger criminal prosecution. Lauren, this is evidence of systematic fraud, Marcus said, reviewing my findings in a secure conference room after hours. She's not just incompetent, she's criminal. The login logs told the story clearly. Jessa regularly accessed restricted systems using Graham's credentials, usually late at night when the office was empty. She'd modified documents retroactively, approved expenditures beyond her authority, and created false compliance records to hide her operational failures. The question is, does Graham know she's using his access codes? Marcus asked. I pulled up the security footage request logs. According to IT, Graham personally authorized her access to executive systems. He gave her his credentials deliberately. That makes him complicit in federal security violations. I nodded grimly. They're not just having an affair, they're committing crimes together. And they're doing it with federal contracts that I designed. The irony was perfect. They'd stolen my work, but they were too incompetent to steal it properly. Their greed and stupidity had created a paper trail that would destroy them both. The only question was when federal investigators would discover what I'd already found. I didn't have to wait long. The following Tuesday, Marcus received a private message from someone in IT, a contact who'd been watching the suspicious late-night access patterns that Jessa and Graham thought were secret. Check your secure email, the IT contact wrote. Someone needs to see what's really happening with executive system access. The attached files were devastating. Complete login histories, timestamp analyses, and system modification logs that proved beyond doubt that federal compliance documents had been systematically forged using Graham's executive credentials. This IT person is taking a huge risk by sharing this, Marcus said. They could lose their job if Graham discovers the leak. Unless Graham's already too compromised to retaliate, I replied, studying the evidence. Look at these dates. Every single violation occurred after hours, when Jessa had no legitimate business accessing federal contracts. The pattern was so obvious that even the most basic audit would uncover it immediately. Graham and Jessa had been sloppy, arrogant, and criminally stupid. They'd assumed that stolen authority would protect them from scrutiny. But federal contracts include mandatory auditing requirements, specifically designed to catch exactly this kind of fraud. The Department of Commerce would be conducting their routine compliance review within weeks, and these violations would surface automatically. Marcus, we don't need to report this ourselves, I realized. The system I designed will catch them without any action from us. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting incompetent people destroy themselves. The Department of Commerce compliance audit request arrived on a Thursday morning, triggering the automated review process I'd built into Clayton Ridge's federal contract systems. Graham's face went pale when Patricia forwarded him the notification during our weekly leadership meeting. Standard procedure, he announced, his voice carefully controlled. Routine compliance verification for federal contracts. Nothing unusual. But his eyes found Jessa's across the room, and the look they exchanged was pure panic. They both knew that automated audits would surface exactly the kind of irregularities they'd been creating for months. Lauren, Graham said after the meeting, his tone carrying the desperate familiarity of someone who'd once trusted my expertise. Given your operational knowledge of federal compliance, perhaps you could assist Jessa with audit preparation. The request hit me like a physical blow. 6 weeks earlier, they'd stripped away my authority and humiliated me publicly. Now, facing criminal investigation, They wanted my expertise to save them from their own corruption. Part of me, the professional who'd built these systems with pride, wanted to help preserve the work I'd created. But a larger part remembered standing in Graham's office while they handed my career to his mistress. "I'd be happy to provide operational support," I replied carefully. Though I should mention that automated audit systems flag any irregularities for manual review. The Department of Commerce takes document integrity very seriously. The irony burned. They needed my knowledge to understand how thoroughly they'd destroyed themselves. By Friday afternoon, the automated compliance audit had flagged 17 separate violations in federal contract documentation. The Department of Commerce investigation team requested an immediate conference call with Clayton Ridge's executive leadership to discuss significant irregularities requiring urgent clarification. Graham assembled a crisis management team that included Patricia, our legal counsel, and, desperately, me. Jessa was notably excluded from the federal response team, a strategic decision that spoke volumes about Graham's priorities when criminal liability was on the line. "Lauren, we need your expertise on federal compliance protocols," Graham said, his earlier arrogance replaced by obvious fear. "You designed these systems. Help us understand what the investigators are seeing." I reviewed the audit findings with the detached professionalism of a surgeon examining a terminal diagnosis. The investigators have identified systematic backdating of compliance documents, unauthorized use of executive credentials for system access, and falsification of vendor safety certifications. "How serious is this?" our legal counsel asked. "Federal contract fraud carries criminal penalties, including prison sentences and permanent disbarment from government contracting," I replied matter-of-factly. "Companies can lose their federal eligibility permanently." Graham's face went gray. "What are our options for resolution?" "Full cooperation, immediate disclosure of responsible parties, and termination of anyone involved in document falsification." I didn't mention that the responsible parties were sitting in the room with us, or that their termination wouldn't prevent criminal prosecution. Sometimes the truth reveals itself more powerfully when delivered with surgical precision rather than emotional satisfaction. Justice was coming, methodically and inevitably. The Department of Commerce investigators arrived Monday morning with the grim efficiency of federal law enforcement. 3 agents, 2 forensic accountants, and 1 cybersecurity specialist who immediately requested access to our server logs and executive credential usage reports. "We're conducting a criminal investigation into potential federal contract fraud," the lead investigator announced during the mandatory all-hands meeting. "We expect full cooperation from all employees. Any attempts to obstruct this investigation will result in additional federal charges." Graham's hands were visibly shaking as he promised complete transparency and cooperation. Jessa hadn't shown up for work, a strategic absence that only highlighted her guilt to anyone paying attention. "Miss Fields," the lead investigator approached me after the general meeting, "our preliminary review indicates you designed the original compliance systems. We'll need your technical expertise to understand the timeline and scope of these violations." For the next 4 hours, I walked federal investigators through every system I'd designed, every safeguard I'd implemented, and every audit trail that would help them build their criminal case. The investigators were thorough, professional, and clearly experienced with corporate fraud prosecutions. "These systems are impressively comprehensive," the cybersecurity specialist noted. "Whoever designed this framework obviously understood federal security requirements at an expert level." "Thank you," I replied. I wanted to ensure Clayton Ridge maintained the highest compliance standards. What I didn't mention was that I'd also designed these systems to be completely transparent to federal investigation, specifically because I'd anticipated that incompetent leadership might eventually compromise our compliance integrity. Sometimes good systems design includes planning for other people's criminal stupidity. By Tuesday afternoon, just 4 days after federal investigators arrived, word of the criminal investigation had reached Clayton Ridge's investors, triggering a financial crisis that threatened the company's survival. Renshaw Capital, our second-largest investor, demanded an emergency board meeting to discuss immediate leadership changes necessary to preserve investment value. The rumors about Graham and Jessa's relationship had been circulating for months, but now those whispers carried criminal implications. If the CEO was personally involved with someone who'd committed federal fraud using his credentials, every business decision became suspect. The investors are terrified, Marcus reported after overhearing a heated phone conversation between Graham and the board chairman. Renshaw Capital is threatening to pull their $12 million investment unless Graham resigns immediately. I wasn't surprised. Federal contract fraud investigations destroy corporate reputations permanently, and smart investors abandon sinking ships before the wreckage drags them down. What about Jessa? I asked. Still missing. Her LinkedIn profile went dark yesterday, and rumor is she's hired a criminal defense attorney. The beautiful irony was that Graham had sacrificed my career to protect his mistress, but when federal investigators arrived, he'd thrown her under the bus without hesitation. Corporate loyalty evaporates quickly when prison sentences are discussed. Lauren, Marcus continued, there's something else. Patricia wants to meet with you privately this afternoon. Word is, the board wants to discuss reinstating your executive position. Too little, too late. Some bridges can't be rebuilt after they've been burned for personal convenience. But I was curious to hear their offer, if only to understand how desperately they were scrambling to contain the damage they'd created. Patricia's emergency meeting felt like a corporate confession booth. She sat across from me in the same conference room where they'd demoted me 8 weeks earlier, but now the power dynamic had completely reversed. Lauren, the board recognizes that recent organizational changes were misguided, she began carefully. We're prepared to restore your full executive authority, including retroactive compensation adjustments and public acknowledgement of your contributions to the federal contract. I studied her face, seeing the desperation that comes with watching 7-figure federal contracts disappear due to leadership stupidity. The professional part of me, the part that had loved building systems that worked, felt a flicker of temptation. This was my life's work. These were relationships I'd spent years cultivating. What exactly are you asking me to do? Lead the crisis response team, coordinate with federal investigators, help us preserve whatever relationships can be salvaged from this situation. You want me to clean up the mess that Graham and Jessa created while you all watched? Patricia nodded reluctantly. You're the only person with sufficient federal compliance expertise to navigate this investigation. The board understands that your leadership could mean the difference between corporate survival and complete collapse. The offer stung because it was everything I'd deserved months ago, delivered only when they faced criminal consequences for their choices. They were asking me to save a company that had sacrificed my career for an affair. I appreciate the board's confidence, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt, but I've already accepted a position elsewhere. Patricia's face went pale. Where? Core Nova Systems. They understand the value of competence over connections. 8 weeks after my demotion, and just 5 days after federal investigators arrived, Graham's resignation came Wednesday morning via company-wide email that blamed strategic differences with board governance rather than acknowledging criminal investigations. The corporate euphemisms couldn't hide the reality that he was fleeing before criminal charges were filed. Effective immediately, Graham Colton has stepped down as CEO to pursue other opportunities, the board statement read. We thank him for his service and wish him success in his future endeavors. The timeline told the real story. April demotion, May fraud discovery, June federal investigation, and Graham's immediate exit once criminal liability became clear. No mention of Jessa, the systematic document falsification, or the compliance violations that had triggered this corporate meltdown. Marcus found me packing my personal items that afternoon. So you're really leaving? Even after everything that's happened? Especially after everything that's happened, I replied. They showed me exactly who they are when they thought they could get away with it. Why would I stay and pretend that didn't matter? The new interim CEO wants to meet with you. Apparently they're desperate to retain your expertise. I laughed, surprising myself with how genuine it sounded. Marcus, they had my expertise for 7 years. They traded it for an affair and some compliance fraud. That's not a mistake. That's a character judgment. What about the team, your projects? I'm hoping some of you will join me at Cornova. They're building something legitimate, a company where competence matters more than connections. Marcus grinned. When do we start? Sometimes the best career moves happen when other people's poor choices create unexpected opportunities. The federal indictments were unsealed Thursday morning, confirming what anyone with basic pattern recognition had suspected for weeks. Graham faced 4 counts of federal contract fraud, 2 counts of document falsification, and 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Jessa's charges were even more extensive. 7 counts of document fraud, 3 counts of identity theft for using Graham's credentials, and 2 counts of conspiracy. The federal prosecutors had built an airtight case using the very audit trails I'd designed to protect Clayton Ridge's integrity. Maximum sentence for conspiracy to defraud federal contracts is 20 years, Marcus noted, reading the news coverage during our final coffee break at Clayton Ridge, plus financial penalties that could reach millions. I felt satisfaction, but not the vindictive joy I'd expected. Watching incompetent people destroy themselves was professionally gratifying, but the human cost was still real. Graham had a family, employees who'd respected him, a legacy that was now permanently tainted by his criminal choices. Do you think they'll plea bargain? Marcus asked. Probably, but the damage is done either way. They'll never work in federal contracting again. Clayton Ridge's reputation is destroyed, and every future employer will find this investigation during basic background checks. The beautiful irony was that they'd committed these crimes to steal credit for work they couldn't actually do. If they'd simply left me alone, the federal contract would have succeeded, their reputations would be intact, and Graham would still be CEO of a profitable company. Instead, their greed and incompetence had destroyed everything they'd tried to steal. Elise Rourke's message had arrived the previous Friday, while Clayton Ridge's federal investigation was dominating Research Triangle business journals and industry gossip. As VP of Strategic Operations at Cornova Systems, she'd been watching our corporate meltdown with the professional interest of someone who understood exactly what had happened. "We know you designed GridOps, not Jessa," her private LinkedIn message read. "We know you built the compliance frameworks that Clayton Ridge is about to lose. We'd like to discuss what you could build with full autonomy and proper recognition." 2 weeks after Graham's resignation, our meeting took place in Cornova's downtown Raleigh headquarters, a sleek operation just 4 blocks from Clayton Ridge that felt like a competent adult's version of my former employer's chaotic dysfunction. Elise was direct, professional, and refreshingly honest about their intentions. "We lost the original federal bid to Clayton Ridge because they had better systems integration," she admitted. "Now we know those systems were your work, and we want to hire the architect, not just reverse engineer the plans." The offer was compelling. Senior Director of Federal Systems, complete authority over compliance architecture, equity participation in federal contract successes, and the freedom to build a team using my own judgment rather than corporate politics. "What about my current team?" I asked. "Bring anyone you want. We're more interested in competence than corporate loyalty." For the first time in months, I felt excited about work instead of just surviving it. Sometimes the best opportunities arise from other people's spectacular failures. My resignation letter was brief, professional, and strategically timed for maximum impact. I submitted it Friday afternoon, effective immediately, with copies sent to the interim CEO, the board chairman, and the federal investigators who might need clarification about my role in future proceedings. Due to strategic differences regarding operational priorities, I'm resigning my position at Clayton Ridge to pursue opportunities that better align with my professional values, the letter read. I wish the company success in resolving its current challenges. Marcus submitted his resignation an hour later, followed by 3 other team members who'd grown tired of watching incompetence receive rewards while excellence was punished. By Monday morning, Clayton Ridge had lost most of its federal compliance expertise to Cornova Systems. "The interim CEO is panicking," Patricia told me during an exit interview that felt more like a hostage negotiation. "The federal investigators want to interview everyone involved with compliance systems design." Without your team, we don't have anyone who understands how these systems actually work. I'm sure you'll figure something out, I replied diplomatically. Lauren, please reconsider. We can match any offer Cornova made. We can provide equity, executive authority, whatever you need to stay. I looked around the conference room where they'd demoted me 6 weeks earlier, remembering the humiliation of watching Graham protect his mistress while destroying my career. Patricia, some decisions can't be undone with better offers. Character matters, and this company showed me its character when it thought the consequences didn't matter. What should I tell the board? Tell them that competence has a memory. Cornova's offices felt like arriving in a different country, one where merit mattered more than politics, where expertise was valued over connections, and where strategic decisions were based on operational reality rather than personal convenience. Welcome to Federal Systems Done Right, Elise said, giving me a tour of their secure development facility. We build technology that works because we hire people who know what they're doing. My new team included Marcus and the other Clayton Ridge refugees, plus 6 additional specialists with deep federal contracting experience. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who understood that compliance wasn't bureaucratic overhead. It was the foundation that made everything else possible. Your first project is redesigning our supply chain integration platform, Elise explained. The Department of Defense wants a nationwide logistics system that can reduce fulfillment time by 40% while maintaining complete security compliance. Interested? I smiled, feeling the familiar excitement of a complex technical challenge that would actually be appreciated rather than stolen. When do we start? Yesterday. The federal RFP responses are due in 8 weeks, and we're competing against Clayton Ridge's replacement bid. The irony was perfect. I'd be competing against my former employer using systems I'd designed, with a team I'd trained, for contracts I'd originally won. But this time, I'd receive credit for my work, instead of watching someone else claim it. Sometimes justice looks like getting the opportunity to prove your worth without interference from incompetent leadership. Working at Cornova was like discovering what my career could have been without the constant drag of corporate politics. Within 6 weeks, my team had designed a supply chain AI platform that integrated federal compliance requirements with predictive logistics algorithms, creating something genuinely revolutionary. This is remarkable work, the Department of Defense Technical Review Team noted during our presentation. The compliance integration is seamless, the security protocols exceed requirements, and the efficiency gains are measurable and significant. Unlike Clayton Ridge's presentation style, where executives took credit for work they didn't understand, Cornova's approach was refreshingly honest. I presented the technical architecture, Marcus explained the operational benefits, and Elise handled the strategic implications. Everyone received credit for their actual contributions. Ms. Fields, the DoD procurement officer, asked, "This architecture looks similar to some of the Clayton Ridge systems that were recently compromised. Can you comment on that?" "I designed those original systems during my previous employment," I replied professionally. "This platform represents significant improvements based on lessons learned and enhanced security requirements." What I didn't mention was that the new system included fraud detection capabilities specifically designed to prevent the kind of violations that had destroyed Graham and Jessa. Sometimes the best innovation comes from understanding how previous systems failed. "When can you begin implementation?" the procurement officer asked. "Immediately. We've been waiting for authorization to change how federal logistics actually works." Cornova won the Department of Defense contract by a margin that surprised even our most optimistic projections. The federal procurement team praised our innovative integration of compliance and efficiency, and specifically cited my technical architecture as setting new standards for federal systems design. Within 3 months, trade publications were covering our work with headlines like "Cornova revolutionizes federal supply chain," and "Former Clayton Ridge architect delivers DoD innovation." Forbes TechWatch featured our platform in their annual Federal Innovation Roundup, and Federal Innovation Review requested an exclusive interview about compliance integration methodology. "You've built something extraordinary," Elise told me during our quarterly review. The DoD contract is generating interest from 6 other federal agencies. We're looking at potential revenue growth that could reach 9 figures. The professional satisfaction was immense, but the personal vindication was even better. Every article that mentioned my work included references to the architect who left Clayton Ridge before their federal contract scandal, creating a narrative that highlighted my competence while underscoring their corruption. "Lauren, we're promoting you to VP of Federal Innovation," Elise continued. "Full equity participation, board advisory position, and complete authority over federal systems development." It was the career advancement that Clayton Ridge should have offered years earlier, now happening at a company that understood the value of expertise over politics. "There's one more thing," Elise added with a smile. "The annual Federal Innovation Summit wants you as their keynote speaker." This was the recognition that validated 7 years of competent work that had been overshadowed by other people's mediocrity. Standing on the Federal Innovation Summit stage in Washington, D.C., I looked out at an audience of 600 federal contractors, government officials, and industry leaders who represented the best of American technological excellence. This was the moment that proved competence eventually overcomes corruption. "I want to talk about integrity over optics," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. "About building what works instead of what looks good in PowerPoint presentations." The audience was completely attentive, understanding that they were hearing from someone who'd navigated the worst of corporate politics and emerged with both integrity and success intact. 2 years ago, I was demoted so that someone connected could take credit for work they didn't understand. The decision wasn't based on performance, competence, or results. It was based on relationships that had nothing to do with federal contracting excellence. Murmurs rippled through the audience as people recognized the Clayton Ridge scandal reference. But here's what insecurity forgets. Competence speaks louder than politics, eventually. Truth has a way of surfacing, and excellence finds a way to flourish, even when it's temporarily suppressed by people who mistake authority for expertise. The applause started slowly, then built to a standing ovation that lasted 2 full minutes. In the back of the auditorium, I noticed 2 suits from Clayton Ridge's former board watching without clapping. Build systems that work, hire people who know what they're doing, and remember that your reputation is built on results, not relationships. As I left the stage, I felt the satisfaction of having turned professional humiliation into public vindication. 18 months after the keynote, I sat with Marcus at a coffee shop in downtown Raleigh, reviewing the latest federal contract awards that Cornova had secured using platforms I'd designed. The autumn sun streamed through windows that overlooked a city where I'd rebuilt my career on my own terms. 3 more federal agencies want to implement your compliance integration methodology, Marcus reported, scrolling through our project pipeline. The Department of Energy, Homeland Security, and Commerce all submitted formal requests for system architecture consultations. I smiled, thinking about the irony that the Department of Commerce, the same agency that had investigated Clayton Ridge's federal fraud, now wanted to hire me to improve their internal systems. "You built something real," Marcus continued, "without firing a shot, without seeking revenge, without compromising your integrity. You just outlasted them." My phone buzzed with a news alert. Former Clayton Ridge CEO Graham Colton sentenced to 18 months federal prison for contract fraud. The article mentioned that Jessa had received a similar sentence after pleading guilty to multiple federal charges. I felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy, just the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that competence had prevailed over corruption. "Lauren," Marcus said, grinning at his own phone, "you're going to love this. The Department of Commerce just sent a contract request. They want Cornova to audit federal compliance systems for Clayton Ridge's remaining government contracts." The irony was perfect. They wanted me to audit the very systems I'd originally designed to clean up the mess that Graham and Jessa had made of my life's work. "I didn't need revenge," I told Marcus, accepting the contract with a single click. "I just needed the truth to do its job." Sometimes justice looks like getting paid to fix what incompetent people broke while trying to steal your legacy. I got demoted for my boss's mistress. Then she made one mistake that ruined them both.